Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. My name is Lieutenant Daryl Danko, UN Peacekeeping Force. We were stationed in the Ruzizi Valley, monitoring the ceasefire between the coalition forces and the Mountain Brigade. Typical assignment: observe, report, de-escalate. I've worn the blue helmet in 4 different conflict zones, but nothing prepared me for today. It started around 600. I was at the observation post with Corporal Fisher, watching the coalition checkpoint. Just routine surveillance, or it should have been. The coalition guards were acting strange. 2 of them were arguing, which wasn't unusual, but then one collapsed. The other bent over him, and I remember thinking he was administering first aid. I was wrong. Through the binoculars, I saw him tearing at his comrade's throat with his teeth. "Fisher," I said, "get the major on the radio." Fisher was already staring through his scope. "What the hell? Sir, he's eating him." I grabbed our field radio. "Compound, this is Outpost 3. We have a situation at the coalition checkpoint." Static answered. "Compound, do you copy?" Fisher lowered his rifle. "Sir, there's movement in the trees behind the checkpoint." I raised my binoculars again. Several figures were emerging from the forest. Their bodies contorted like marionettes with half-cut strings, limbs swinging at odd angles as if their joints had liquefied. The guard at the checkpoint, the one who'd been feeding on his comrade, turned toward them. For a moment, I thought he'd engage. Instead, they surrounded the fresh corpse together, falling on it like carrion birds. "We need to get back to base," I said. We took the jeep, driving faster than safety allowed on the rutted dirt road. The radio remained dead. As we rounded the bend toward our compound, we saw the gate standing open. Our first sign something was wrong. UN protocol is strict about perimeter security. Those gates are never left unsecured. "Slow down," I ordered. Fisher eased off the accelerator, and we approached cautiously. The compound was chaos. 2 of our vehicles were on fire. Bodies lay scattered across the yard, some in UN blue helmets, others in civilian clothes. And moving among them were our own people, lurching forward with broken, disjointed movements, as if each step caused them pain they no longer felt. Their clothes hung heavy with crimson stains. Fisher stopped the jeep 30 yards from the gate. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "What happened?" Before I could answer, Major Green emerged from the command center, moving normally. He spotted us and broke into a run. "Start the engine," I told Fisher. Something was off about Green, the way he moved, too urgent, too direct. "But sir, it's the major." "Start the damn engine." Green was 20 yards away when I saw it, the glistening red down his uniform front. The ashen complexion like a corpse left too long in the sun. His eyes were vacant, like glass marbles pressed into dough, focused and yet seeing nothing. Fisher hit the gas just as Green reached us. The major's hand caught my sleeve, tearing the fabric as we accelerated away. His jaw snapped inches from my arm. The image of his face is burned into my memory. A man I'd shared meals with for months, now reduced to something primitive and insatiable. We drove aimlessly at first, shock numbing our decision-making. After a few miles, I ordered Fisher to stop at a bend in the road where we could see in all directions. "We need a plan," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "First, we try the radio again. If we can reach command in Goma." Fisher wasn't listening. He was staring past me, his face blanched white. I turned to follow his gaze. A village stretched across the valley below us. Smoke rose from several buildings. Even from this distance, we could see figures flooding through the streets, not running in panic, moving with calculated inevitability, converging on the few people still fleeing. "It's not just the compound," Fisher said. "It's everywhere." I tried the radio again, cycling through every emergency frequency. Nothing but static. We were alone. "The missionary hospital," I decided. "It's fortified, has medical supplies and a satellite phone." St. Catherine's Hospital sat on the other side of the valley, run by an international aid group. We'd coordinated with their security team before. Fisher nodded, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. We started down the hill, keeping our speed measured to avoid attention. As we drove, I took inventory of our resources. 2 sidearms with limited ammunition, a first aid kit, a day's worth of rations, my field knife, not enough. The road took us through a small trading post, usually a bustling place where locals sold crafts and produce. Now it was a slaughterhouse. Bodies lay torn in the dirt. A market stall was still burning, sending greasy black smoke into the air. And moving among the carnage were the infected, some locals, some wearing coalition uniforms, all wearing expressions of hollow hunger. "Don't stop," I whispered as if they might hear us. We were nearly through when a woman ran into the road, clutching a child to her chest. She screamed for help, waving desperately at our UN insignia. "Sir?" Fisher looked at me, the question in his eyes clear. Every instinct told me to stop, to help. It's why we wear the blue helmets. But I'd seen the horde turning toward the sound of her voice, their heads rotating with synchronized precision like weather vanes in a changing wind. "Keep driving," I ordered, the words bitter in my mouth. Fisher hesitated only a second before pressing the accelerator. I watched in the side mirror as the infected swarmed the spot where the woman had stood. I tell myself she might have escaped. I don't believe it. 2 miles down the road, we found the wreckage of a coalition transport truck. It had collided with a civilian bus, both vehicles now blocking the narrow passage. Bodies were scattered around the scene, some torn apart, others moving with discordant broken rhythms like damaged clockwork toys. "We'll have to go on foot," I said. The hospital was still 5 miles away, but the road ahead was impassable. Fisher nodded grimly. We gathered what supplies we could carry and abandoned the jeep, moving into the thick brush alongside the road. The plan was to parallel the roadway, staying hidden while making our way to the hospital. We hadn't gone half a mile when we heard voices ahead, human voices speaking urgently. We dropped to a crouch, weapons ready. 3 figures emerged into a small clearing, 2 men in coalition uniforms and a woman in civilian clothes. They were moving quickly but normally, clearly uninfected. The woman was supporting one of the men, who limped heavily. "Hold position," I whispered to Fisher. We couldn't risk an encounter until we knew more. The trio stopped in the clearing, the injured man slumping against a tree. The woman examined his leg, saying something too quiet to hear. The second coalition soldier kept watch, his rifle raised. That's when I noticed the blood soaking through the injured man's pant leg. "We need to move," I told Fisher. "Now." "But sir, they're not infected. We could join forces." Before I could explain, the injured man began convulsing. His companions stepped back in alarm. The convulsions lasted only seconds before he went still. Then with spasmodic twitches, he began to rise. The standing coalition soldier didn't hesitate. He fired a single shot into his comrade's head. The body collapsed in a heap. The gunshot was a dinner bell. Within seconds, we heard them coming, branches snapping, undergrowth rustling as the infected converged on the sound. The coalition soldier grabbed the woman's arm and they ran, disappearing into the trees on the far side of the clearing. Fisher and I retreated in the opposite direction, moving as quietly as possible while the infected swarmed the clearing behind us. In our haste, Fisher caught his foot on an exposed root and fell hard. The contents of his pack spilled out, metal canteen clanging against stone. The sound might as well have been a siren. I helped Fisher up, and we ran blindly through the forest as the creatures crashed through the vegetation behind us. Their collective groan rippled through the air, raw and visceral, and like the sound of hunger itself. We burst out of the trees onto a dirt road. Ahead of us stood a small cement block building, a ranger station for the nearby wildlife preserve. Without discussion, we sprinted for it. The door was locked. I smashed a window with the butt of my pistol, reached in and unlocked it from inside. We tumbled through just as the first of the infected emerged from the tree line. I slammed the door shut and dragged a heavy desk in front of it. The creatures reached the building seconds later, throwing themselves against the door and windows. The glass cracked but held. Their wails permeated the air, guttural and insistent. "They'll break through eventually," Fisher said, checking the windows for another escape route. I nodded, searching the station for anything useful. In a back office, I found a shortwave radio. The ranger station had its own solar power system still functioning. I turned the dial, searching desperately for any transmission. "This is Lieutenant Daryl Danko, UN Peacekeeping Force Ruzizi Sector, requesting emergency evacuation. Does anyone copy?" The static seemed to mock us. I tried again, cycling through frequencies. On the third attempt, a voice broke through, distorted, intermittent but unmistakably human. "UN forces, outbreak containment, hold position. This is Lieutenant Danko. We're trapped in a ranger station 5 kilometers west of St. Catherine's Hospital. The compound has been overrun. Request immediate extraction. Quarantine in effect. No extraction authorized. Safe zones being established." The transmission faded into static. Fisher stared at me, the hope draining from his face. "They're not coming," he said. Outside, the infected continued their assault on our shelter, their numbers growing. Through a crack in the window boards, I could see dozens of them now. Local villagers, coalition soldiers, even a few UN peacekeepers still wearing their blue helmets. The symbol of protection had become meaningless. I tried the radio again, but the voice was gone. We were on our own. Night fell. The creatures outside grew more frenzied in the darkness. Fisher and I took turns watching, though neither of us could sleep. We found a map pinned to the wall showing the region. St. Catherine's Hospital was marked, along with various ranger outposts and villages. "If we can make it to the hospital," I said, "they might have information about these safe zones." Fisher nodded, but his expression was doubtful. "Even if we get past these things outside, the hospital is probably overrun too." He was right, but I needed a plan, something to focus on besides the horror of our situation. The window glass cracked further, spider webbing across the frame. It wouldn't hold much longer. The sound of shattering glass woke me from a half-sleep. Fisher was already on his feet, pistol aimed at the window where a grasping hand had broken through. He fired once, and the hand disappeared. "They're coming in," he said. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. I scrambled to gather our supplies. "Back office, now!" We retreated to the small room with the shortwave radio. It had one window, currently intact, and a solid door. I dragged a filing cabinet in front of the door, while Fisher kept watch through a small gap. "There are too many," he said. "Dozens, maybe more. They've surrounded the building." October nights in the valley were cold, and our breath fogged in the dim light of our single flashlight. I checked my watch. 3:27 a.m. Dawn was still hours away. "The window," I said, nodding to the back wall. "If we can get out without them seeing us, we might make it to the trees." Fisher looked skeptical. "And then what?" "The hospital. It's our only option." The shortwave radio crackled to life, startling us both. I lunged for it, adjusting the dial. "Emergency broadcast. All military and peacekeeping personnel. Extraction operation codenamed Desert Shield. Coordinates follow." I grabbed the map from the wall, marking the location as the voice recited the numbers. It was St. Catherine's Hospital. They were planning an extraction. "The extraction is scheduled for 800 hours. Military support inbound. Secure perimeter. Hold position until..." The transmission faded to static. "Did you hear that?" I said, adrenaline surging through me. "They're coming. We just need to reach the hospital by dawn." The sound of splintering wood from the main room reminded us of our immediate problem. The infected had breached the station. "Now or never," Fisher said, moving to the window. He used the butt of his pistol to knock out the glass, then swept the frame clear. The opening was tight, barely wide enough for our shoulders. "I'll go first," I said. "If it's clear, I'll signal." Fisher nodded, positioning himself to cover the door. I squeezed through the window, the rough edges tearing at my uniform. The cold night air hit me like a physical blow after the stuffy confines of the ranger station. I dropped to the ground, crouching low, scanning the darkness. The back of the station faced thick forest about 15 yards away. Between us and the trees was open ground, dimly lit by the half-moon. I could hear the infected at the front of the building, their collective growl punctuated by the sound of breaking glass and wood. I signaled Fisher. He slipped through the window with surprising grace for his size, landing softly beside me. "Move slowly," I whispered. "Any sudden motion will draw them." We crept toward the tree line, every step deliberate. 10 yards, 5. A crash behind us. The station's front door had given way. The infected poured into the building, their shadows visible through the windows. Our scent would lead them to the back office soon enough. "Run!" I hissed, abandoning stealth. We sprinted for the trees just as the first infected rounded the corner of the building. Their gurgling howls rose in the night air as they spotted us, their broken movements accelerating with the excitement of the hunt. The forest swallowed us, branches whipping at our faces. We ran blindly in the darkness, guided only by the need to put distance between ourselves and the horde. Fisher stumbled, caught himself, kept going. I risked a glance back. Shadowy figures twisted through the trees behind us, never slowing, never tiring. We ran until our lungs burned, until each breath felt like swallowing fire. Finally, when I thought my legs would give out, we reached a small stream. The water was icy, the current swift from recent rains. "Wade upstream," I gasped. "It might mask our scent." We sloshed through the water, the cold numbing our feet and calves. The infected were still behind us, but their sounds were fainter now. After what felt like an eternity, we staggered out of the stream onto a rocky bank. Fisher collapsed, chest heaving. I wasn't in much better shape. Did we lose them?" he asked between breaths. I listened. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects. Just the distant sound of water and the hushed rustle of leaves in the breeze. "For now," I said. "But we need to keep moving. The hospital is southeast of here." We oriented ourselves using the position of the moon and stars, basic survival training that now seemed like a gift. The sky was beginning to lighten, the deepest black fading to navy in the east. Dawn wasn't far off. "What do you think they're planning?" Fisher asked as we picked our way through the underbrush. "The military, I mean." "Extraction," they said. "Maybe they've established a containment zone. The hospital would make a good defensive position." Fisher was quiet for a moment. "What if it's something else? What if they're not there to rescue survivors?" The thought had occurred to me too. Military responses to outbreaks often prioritized containment over evacuation, but I needed hope to cling to. "We'll find out when we get there," I said. "Keep moving." The eastern sky had turned a pale gray by the time we reached the edge of the forested ridge overlooking St. Catherine's Hospital. We dropped to our stomachs, crawling forward to get a better view. The hospital was a 2-story concrete building surrounded by a high wall. Under normal circumstances, it would house perhaps 30 patients. Now I could see dozens of people in the courtyard. Some wore hospital scrubs, others civilian clothes. A few were armed. I counted at least 3 rifle barrels glinting in the early morning light. Most significantly, the hospital hadn't been overrun. The wall had held. "They've created a stronghold," Fisher said, hope creeping into his voice. I studied the surroundings. The hospital sat at the end of a long approach road, about a quarter-mile of open ground from our position. At the main gate, I could see barricades and what appeared to be defensive positions. But I also saw movement beyond the wall's perimeter, the distinctive lurching gait of the infected. They gathered at the fence like moths to a flame, drawn by the signs of life within. "We need to get down there," I said, "but we can't risk a direct approach, too exposed." Fisher pointed to the east. "Service road. Looks like it winds around to the back entrance. More cover that way." It was our best option. We worked our way down the ridge, staying in the tree line as long as possible, before darting across the first stretch of open ground to a drainage ditch that offered some concealment. The service road was little more than a dirt track, but it led toward a smaller gate at the rear of the compound. As we approached, we could see it was barricaded from the inside. 2 armed figures stood watch from a makeshift platform just inside the wall. I pulled out my UN beret, holding it up as we approached. "United Nations Peacekeepers," I called out, keeping my voice low enough not to carry beyond the immediate area. "We're uninfected." One of the guards raised a rifle. "Stop there, hands where we can see them." We complied, dropping our packs and raising our hands. "We heard the transmission," I said. "About the extraction operation." The guards exchanged glances. One of them disappeared from view, presumably to get authorization. Minutes later, the barricade shifted, and the gate opened just wide enough for a person to slip through. A woman emerged, mid-40s, wearing a doctor's coat over military fatigues. Her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she carried a handgun with practiced ease. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Williams, U.S. Army Medical Corps," she said, scanning us with clinical detachment. "We need to check you for bites or scratches before you come in." "Lieutenant Daryl Danko, UN Peacekeeping Force," I replied. "This is Corporal Fisher. We're clean." She nodded to her guards, who approached us with purpose. One kept his rifle trained on us while the other performed a thorough search, checking every inch of exposed skin and even making us remove our boots. "They're clean," the guard confirmed. Dr. Williams holstered her weapon. "Follow me, and stay quiet. Sound attracts them." Inside the compound, the scene was one of organized chaos. The courtyard had been transformed into a triage area, with the wounded laid out on blankets and tarps. Medical personnel moved among them, administering what care they could with limited supplies. Armed guards patrolled the walls, occasionally taking shots at infected that came too close. Dr. Williams led us to a small office inside the main building. Maps covered the walls, marked with red X's and circles. A radio setup similar to the one at the ranger station sat on the desk. "You heard our broadcast," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied. "Something about an extraction operation. Desert Shield." She nodded, suddenly looking exhausted. "We've been holding out for 3 days. The outbreak hit us fast. Patients started turning in the wards, staff infected while treating the wounded. We managed to secure the building, but we're running out of supplies." "What happened out there?" Fisher asked. "How did this start?" Dr. Williams shook her head. "We don't know exactly. The first cases appeared in villages near the border. By the time patients started arriving here, it was already spreading exponentially. The incubation period is short, sometimes only hours. Once symptoms appear, death follows quickly. And then, they come back. Zombies," Fisher said, giving voice to what we'd all been thinking but reluctant to say. Dr. Williams didn't contradict him. "Military command has authorized an extraction. Helicopters are coming at 0800. They'll take essential personnel and as many uninfected civilians as they can carry." "And the others?" I asked. Her expression hardened. "We can't save everyone, Lieutenant. We've got room for maybe 60 people on the transports. We have over 100 in the compound." The weight of that math settled over us like a shroud. "What can we do to help?" I asked. "The extraction team is sending an advance unit to secure the landing zone," she said, pointing to a map. "Our scouts have spotted military vehicles about 3 miles out, but they've also reported increased infected activity in the area. We need to make sure that team reaches us." "You want us to go back out there?" Fisher asked incredulously. Dr. Williams fixed him with a steady gaze. "I'm asking for volunteers to reinforce our perimeter and help guide the advance team in. You're trained soldiers. We need you." Before I could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Dr. Williams rushed from the office. Fisher and I closed behind. In the courtyard, a guard was restraining a middle-aged man, while a nurse checked a young girl who lay motionless on a blanket. "She's infected," the guard was shouting. "He hid her bite." "She's my daughter," the man cried, struggling against his captor. "She's just sick. It's not the virus, I swear." Dr. Williams pushed through the gathering crowd, kneeling beside the child. She examined the girl's arm, where an angry wound festered. "How long ago?" Williams asked, her voice tight. "Yesterday," the man sobbed. "But it's just a fever. She'll get better. Please don't put her outside, please." The nurse shook her head. "Temperature's 104, pulse is erratic. It's progressing fast." Dr. Williams stood, her face grim. "Take them both to isolation. Standard protocol." "No!" The man's anguish filled the courtyard. "You can't do this, you can't!" As they dragged him away, his eyes found mine, recognized the UN insignia on my uniform. You're supposed to protect us. That's what you're here for. Help us." I looked away, shame burning in my gut. He was right, but there was nothing I could do. Dr. Williams caught my expression. "This is the 7th case today. Isolation is the only way to maintain the perimeter. We can't risk an outbreak inside the walls." "What happens in isolation?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "We watch them when they turn. We do what's necessary." The cold practicality of it chilled me more than the October air, but I understood the calculus. In this new world, compassion had become a luxury few could afford. A shout from the wall interrupted us. "Contact! Vehicles approaching from the south." We rushed to the main gate. Through binoculars, I could see a convoy of 3 armored personnel carriers moving steadily up the road toward the hospital. Military support had arrived. "They're early," Dr. Williams said, checking her watch. "Extraction wasn't scheduled until 800. "Maybe they're just securing the area first," I suggested. As we watched, the lead vehicle stopped about half a mile from the hospital. Soldiers emerged, taking defensive positions around the convoy. They wore full tactical gear, their movements precise and coordinated. "Something's wrong," Fisher muttered beside me. "Why are they stopping?" Dr. Williams grabbed a radio from a nearby guard. "Desert Shield Advance Team, this is St. Catherine's Hospital. We have you in sight. Do you copy?" The radio crackled. "Hospital, this is Captain Reynolds, U.S. Army Special Forces. We're encountering heavy infected presence on the approach road. Request you activate the landing zone beacons to provide a target for air support." "Air support?" Dr. Williams frowned. "That wasn't in the extraction plan." Before she could respond, we heard it, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors, growing louder by the second. "They're coming in hot," the guard next to us said, pointing to the eastern sky where dark shapes had appeared. 4 military helicopters approached in formation, flying low and fast. 2 were transport models large enough to carry troops. The others were attack helicopters bristling with weapons. "Something doesn't feel right," I said, a cold dread settling in my stomach. The radio crackled again. "Hospital, be advised. We're encountering significant resistance. Requesting immediate assistance to clear the approach." Dr. Williams keyed the radio. "Captain, we have limited personnel. We can't—" Her words were cut off by a deafening explosion. One of the attack helicopters had fired a missile at a cluster of infected blocking the road ahead of the convoy. "What are they doing?" Fisher shouted over the noise. "The sound will attract every infected for miles." He was right. Already, I could see movement in the tree line bordering the road. Dozens, then hundreds of figures emerging, drawn by the commotion. The helicopters swooped lower, machine guns blazing as they strafed the growing horde. Bodies fell, but for every one that dropped, 3 more emerged from the surrounding area. "This is all wrong," Dr. Williams said, her face pale. The extraction plan was supposed to be quiet, minimal engagement. The convoy pushed forward, their mounted guns firing continuously. The noise was catastrophic, exactly what we'd been avoiding since the outbreak began. Then I spotted something that made my blood freeze. Beyond the infected swarming the road, beyond the firing convoy, a mass of hundreds, maybe thousands of figures poured from the distant tree line. The military operation had stirred a hornet's nest, and now the swarm was coming. "They're going to be overrun," I said. As if confirming my assessment, the lead vehicle in the convoy suddenly swerved, crashing into a ditch as infected climbed onto its hull. The other vehicles pressed forward, abandoning their comrade. The radio erupted with panicked voices. "Taking heavy casualties, fall back, fall back!" One of the transport helicopters descended toward the hospital's courtyard, rotors kicking up dust and debris. The sides were open, revealing armed soldiers preparing to disembark. Dr. Williams ran toward it, waving her arms. "We need to postpone. The area is compromised." Either they couldn't hear her over the rotor noise, or they were ignoring her commands. The helicopter touched down, and soldiers poured out, forming a perimeter. A man in officer's insignia approached Dr. Williams. "Major Lawrence," he shouted over the noise. "We're here to extract priority personnel. We have 15 minutes before the site is overrun." "This wasn't the plan," Williams shouted back. "The extraction wasn't supposed to draw attention." The Major's face was grim. "Plans changed. The infection has spread beyond containment parameters. We're implementing Protocol Omega." The blood drained from Williams's face. "Omega? But that would mean—" "This entire valley has been designated for sanitation," the Major cut her off. "We have orders to extract essential personnel only. The rest—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "You're abandoning them," I said, stepping forward. "All these people. You're just going to leave them to die." The Major's eyes flicked to my UN uniform with thinly veiled contempt. "This isn't a peacekeeping mission anymore. Lieutenant, this is survival. Now stand aside." The soldiers began moving through the compound, selecting individuals based on criteria only they understood. A doctor here, a nurse there, a few civilians with specific skills or knowledge. Everyone else was ordered to remain in place. The realization of what was happening spread through the crowd like wildfire. Panic erupted. People rushed toward the helicopter, begging to be taken. The soldiers formed a barrier, weapons raised. "Stand back," one shouted. "We are authorized to use lethal force." A man broke through, running desperately for the helicopter. A shot rang out and he fell, blood blossoming on his chest. The crowd went silent in horror. Outside the walls, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The convoy had been completely overrun. One of the attack helicopters circled overhead, firing missiles at the largest clusters of infected, but it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. And still they came. A tide of broken bodies flowing toward the hospital, drawn by the noise and chaos of the failed extraction. Fisher grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here now." He was right. Whatever was coming, we didn't want to be here when it arrived. "The wall won't hold," I said, scanning for an escape route. "We need transportation." Fisher pointed to the far side of the compound, where a heavy freight door stood partially open. "Service entrance. There might be vehicles." We slipped away from the chaotic scene in the courtyard, moving toward the freight door. Inside was a loading bay with a single military truck, not part of the convoy, but a supply vehicle that had been at the hospital before the outbreak. "Keys?" Fisher asked. I searched the cab, finding them hanging from the ignition, ready to go. A scream from outside pulled our attention back to the compound. The infected had reached the walls. They clawed at the concrete, piling on top of each other in a grotesque pyramid. Near the main gate, the massive bodies had risen almost to the top of the wall. "They're going to breach," Fisher said, his voice hollow. The second transport helicopter was landing now, taking on the selected evacuees. Dr. Williams was among them, her face a mask of professional detachment as she directed her medical staff onto the aircraft. She noticed us watching and broke away, jogging over to the loading bay. "Lieutenant," she said, breathless, "they're evacuating essential medical personnel to a secure facility in Goma. There might be room for you and your corporal if you—" A massive explosion cut her off. One of the attack helicopters had been hit by something. I couldn't tell what, and was spinning out of control. It crashed into the courtyard in a ball of fire and twisted metal, sending shrapnel in all directions. Dr. Williams was thrown to the ground. I rushed to her side, but it was immediately clear there was nothing to be done. A piece of rotor blade had nearly severed her torso. "Go," she gasped, blood bubbling from her lips. "Protocol Omega means they're going to bomb the valley. Total sanitation." Her last breath rattled from her chest as the implications of her words sank in. "We need to move," I said, pulling Fisher toward the truck. "Now." The freight door was just wide enough for the vehicle. I gunned the engine, crashing through the remaining pallets and boxes blocking our path. Behind us, the hospital compound had descended into utter chaos. The infected had breached the wall in multiple places. The surviving helicopter was lifting off, overcrowded with the lucky few who would escape. I steered the truck down the service road, away from the main approach where the horde was thickest. But there was no clear path. Every route was teeming with the infected, drawn by the sounds of battle and helicopter engines. "There," Fisher pointed to a narrow gap between two advancing groups. "We can make it through." I accelerated, aiming for the opening. The truck plowed through, infected, bouncing off the hood and fenders. We broke free onto a clearer stretch of road, the engine roaring as I pushed it to its limits. In the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my heart stop. High above the valley, tiny black shapes were moving into position. Bomber aircraft. "They're really going to do it," Fisher said, following my gaze. "They're going to bomb the entire valley." We were still well within the blast radius. I checked the map mounted on the truck's dashboard, looking for an escape route. The valley was surrounded by mountains, with only a few roads leading out. All of them would be crawling with infected, drawn by the noise of the failed extraction. "We need to find cover," I said. "Somewhere that can withstand the bombing." Fisher scanned the terrain ahead. "There's a coalition military outpost about 3 miles north. They had bunkers, underground storage. It was our best option." I turned the truck north, pushing the sputtering engine as hard as it would go. The speedometer needle hovered just below 60 miles per hour, the old vehicle's frame rattling with the strain. We had covered perhaps half the distance when disaster struck. The road ahead was completely blocked by an overturned fuel tanker. Flames licked at its ruptured hull, black smoke billowing into the morning sky. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding sideways before coming to a stop just yards from the wreckage. The heat from the fire was intense, making the air shimmer. "We can't get around it," I said, scanning for alternatives. "We'll have to go on foot." As if the universe was determined to thwart us, a distant rumble filled the air. I looked up to see the bombers had begun their run. Explosions blossomed across the southern end of the valley, where the hospital stood. "They've started," Fisher said, his voice tight with fear. "We'll never make it to the outpost in time." He was right. On foot, we'd need at least 30 minutes to reach the bunkers. The bombing would overtake us long before then. Fisher pointed to something on the side of the road, a dark shape half hidden in the drainage ditch. "Is that what I think it is?" I followed his gaze. It was a coalition tank, apparently abandoned during the initial chaos of the outbreak. Its main gun was pointed skyward, the hatch closed. "It might withstand the bombing," I said, hope flickering to life, "if it's intact." We abandoned the truck, sprinting toward the tank. Up close, I could see it was an older model, but the armor appeared undamaged. The hatch was secured from the inside. "Can you open it?" Fisher asked. I examined the access panel. Standard coalition security. During peacekeeping operations, we'd been given emergency override codes for just such equipment to prevent accidents or misuse by untrained personnel. "I think so," I said, punching in the sequence. "If they haven't changed the codes." The panel beeped, and the hatch unlocked with a hydraulic hiss. I pulled it open, revealing the dark interior. "Get in," I ordered Fisher. "I'll check for infected." I swept the beam of my flashlight through the tank's interior. Empty. No bodies, no infected. Just the cramped confines of the fighting compartment. We climbed inside, pulling the hatch shut behind us. The space was claustrophobic, designed for a crew of 3, now housing 2 full-grown men with backpacks and gear. But it was solid, safe. Through the viewports, we could see the bombing growing closer. The ground shook with each impact, the tank rocking slightly on its treads. "Do you think it will hold?" Fisher asked, his voice small in the enclosed space. "It has to," I replied. The minutes stretched into an eternity as the bombing continued across the valley. The explosions grew louder, closer. The tank shuddered with each impact. Inside, dust and fragments of equipment rained down on us. Then, through the viewport, I saw them, infected, hundreds of them, fleeing the bombing like animals before a forest fire. They swarmed across the road, some running with surprising speed, others dragging broken limbs behind them, united in their mindless flight from destruction. "They're running from the bombs," Fisher whispered. As we watched, an explosion tore through a nearby hillside, sending earth and bodies flying. The shockwave hit our tank like a hammer, rolling it partially onto its side. We were thrown against the interior walls, equipment cascading around us. When the movement stopped, the tank had settled at an awkward angle, half in the drainage ditch. Through the tilted viewport, all I could see was a mass of legs and torsos as the infected continued to flee past us. Another explosion. Closer this time. The tank shook violently but held. Then another and another. The world outside became a hell of fire and noise. Inside our metal cocoon, Fisher and I braced ourselves against the walls, against each other, against the inevitable. Then, gradually, the explosions receded. The bombing was moving north, following the valley. For the moment, we had survived. "I think we made it," Fisher said, letting out a shaky breath. Before I could respond, a new sound reached us, a dull, persistent thudding against the tank's hull. The infected had found us. We watched through the viewports as gray hands smeared the glass, faces pressed against the thick barrier, teeth gnashing. They covered the tank like ants on a carcass, pounding and clawing at the metal. "They can't get in," I said, trying to convince myself as much as Fisher. "This thing is designed to withstand RPGs." But there were so many of them. Each individual was weak, but together, their constant assault created a backdrop of continuous noise. A small crack appeared in one of the viewport seals, widening with each impact. "How long do you think we can last in here?" Fisher asked, eyeing our limited supplies. We had water for perhaps 2 days, food for less. I thought about St. Catherine's Hospital, now surely destroyed, about Dr. Williams's last words, about the Protocol Omega that had condemned an entire valley to sanitation. "Long enough," I said, though I didn't believe it. The pounding continued, ceaseless, as the infected tried to reach the living flesh they sensed inside. We were surrounded, trapped in a metal coffin that had become both our salvation and our prison. Outside, the world we knew was gone. The people we were sworn to protect were dead or abandoned. The mission we had been given was meaningless now. I am a UN peacekeeper, but there is no peace left to keep, only survival.